Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Let's take our seats. I'm going to call this meeting of April 27th informational meeting to order. First on the agenda is committee or commission reports. Experience Sioux Falls, the bid board. Councilor Brecky.
Things with the bid board continue to be what I've said a couple times in front of you. It's a good news scenario, and that, you know, it's getting better. It's not where we want it to be. It's not anywhere near normal, but we continue to be the best of the worst, if you will. And by explanation, I did take a few notes this time. Terry was telling us about the STAR report on occupancy rates, you know, an average daily occupancy rates. And she said right now what's keeping us afloat locally is that our average occupancy rates for Friday and Saturday is at 80%. During the rest of the week, it's much slower, but that alone is really helping, you know, that hotel industry. And then when I talked about being the best of the worst, in the occupancy rate, the average occupancy rate for March, Sioux Falls was #1 at 57%. Rapid City was #2 at 54%. Following behind us was, in Rapid City, was Bismarck, Fargo, Omaha, Overland Park, St. Paul being the lowest at 34%. So that's just put in perspective, you know, while it's not near where it wants to be, it's certainly helping, and they are moving in the right direction. We are also #1 in our peer group with year-to-date occupancy at 49.5%. And again, that's up from, since I've been giving these reports, I mean, we're down to 36 at some points. And so, you know, 49.5 was the #1, with, again, Rapid City at 46.9, followed by Fargo, Bismarck, Omaha, Des Moines, you know, with the lowest at 31%. So just kind of putting things in perspective. I think what they would say, again, the hotel industry has been the one that's having the most difficult time recovering. The March showed the hotel percent at 60, or at the March report showed the hotel rate, you know, at a higher rate, but they're still saying that the business travel has not picked up yet, and that's why the during the week numbers are still low. She did say that 60% of leisure travelers have made plans for traveling within the next 6 months. So they're excited about that. The hotel industry feels like, you know, that is happening, and that is going to be the first. But the business travel has not picked up yet, and that they still are expecting that to be slow, you know, and before we can get a complete recovery. And then the other thing, there was a fun report I wanted to mention from the Empire Mall. And that was that they believe that long road trips have surpassed air travel. And that is, you know, enhanced the use of the interstate, which, of course, they're right on. And so they have been beneficiaries of that in addition to the stimulus checks. And they said that their March sales month was the highest it's been since 1992. So they have had a good month. He also did announce that Dillard's is still planning to come. They had these plans before COVID, and the best they know of now is that they still plan to come in and take over Yonkers space, and that Sears is actively involved in redeveloping their space, kind of reinventing themselves. So it was a very positive report from them all, and I thought that was fun and worth reporting to you. And just some other random things, but that's sort of the general nature thing. It's kind of the way it's been, but it's just continuing to creep up until that really business sector comes back, you know, for convention planning, for travel, and for hotel. It's going to still be very tough. But they're an enthusiastic group, and it always amazes me when I attend their meetings how enthusiastic they continue to be in spite of the hardship that they're pulling themselves through at this time.
Thank you. At this time, we'll go to council remarks. Council members, remarks? Seeing none, we'll jump right into our first presentation. 2020 2020 crime statistics by Chief Matt Burns. And let me remind the council that we have a meeting for immediately after this. So if we can wrap up sometime around that 4:30 time, that'd be awesome. Thank you. Chief Burns.
Very good. Thank you, Council. Appreciate the invitation today. I'm pleased to share with you the 2020 crime statistics, and I hope to give some context to them as we kind of go along. So as we review the 2020 numbers, I think it is important to remember that from March on last year, that the whole dynamic of public safety and crime in our city was heavily influenced, and obviously so, by the COVID-19 pandemic. Generally, it does appear that the isolation, the uncertainty, and the disruption to jobs and schools, daycares, and everything that we know about our lives had an overall impact on the community and manifested itself in many ways that are reflected in these stats today. I'm certainly not a social scientist, but patterns do emerge in human behavior, especially when subjected to an external stimulus like a pandemic is, and that's going to reflect again in these numbers. First off, I hope that you can see those. Our call volume finished the year with 127,477 calls for service, and that was 1.3% higher than in 2019. This rate of increase was slightly slower than the 5-year average, but I do attribute that to the greatly slower call volume in the months of March, April, November, and December. And if you recall, those months track very closely with the highest case counts of COVID that we had in our city. Total crime numbers ended the year consistent with the pattern that we observed all year, with homicides, assaults, robberies, and stolen vehicles showing increases. Specifically, the homicide number of 13 was a record for our city, with the previous high being 10 in 2017. Fortunately, our department did solve each of those homicide cases and made arrests in every one. In analyzing the details, 11 of the homicides involved the use of a firearm. 2 were the result of a stabbing. 5 of them were directly narcotics related, 1 for a drug debt owed, 1 occurred during a robbery, a rip-off during the purchase of drugs, and 3 were directly methamphetamine related. 3 of the homicides involved a domestic relationship, and in 10 of the 13 cases, the suspect and the victim were known to each other. While it is troubling to have reached the number of 13 and a record, our city is not alone. Preliminary FBI data from last year shows a 21% increase in homicides across the country. Also, amongst those numbers, the second largest city in our state had 12 of their own homicides. So you can see that last year was tough all over in that regard. As indicated on this chart, other categories of violent crime showing increases were aggravated assaults and robberies. Many of these cases had a drug connection in that they occurred during an illicit drug transaction. Most often, both parties were armed. Another concern was the increase we saw in all of our domestic assaults, both aggravated and simple. This type of crime is indicative of an increased stress and tension in our community, as we saw across the city. And it's obviously one of the most difficult to curb because it most often occurs behind closed doors, out of public view. However, the victims are real, and the impact of families and children are undeniable. On a further somber note, we also ended the year with a record 32 suicides investigated by our department, eclipsing the previous high of 30 in 2017. This, sadly, is also consistent with what many jurisdictions experienced across the country last year. However, I was pleased that the overall overdose deaths were fully 9 lower than in 2019. The number of 19, however tragic, was still lower than in 2019 by 9. And I will raise that up as a slightly bright point because that bucks the national trend as far as overdose deaths. The one specific area I want to shine a light on today that has a significant impact on our city is a continued emphasis on the fight against the trafficking and use of illicit drugs. The bulk of this work is done by our Drug Task Force and Narcotics Crime Unit. These enforcement teams, as you know, exist to keep harmful drugs off our streets and hold those who use and traffic drugs accountable. Last year, the Drug Task Force conducted 136 search warrants and 518 total operations. They seized 57 firearms and over $242,000 in cash related to drug crimes, while investigating 2,676 narcotics cases. But perhaps the most telling part of their efforts is that the team's seizures for fentanyl at 308.13 grams, heroin at 281.44 grams, and methamphetamines at 64.27 pounds are all in the top 2 seizure amounts in the history of our department. In regards to the fentanyl seizures alone, this is tens of thousands of potentially fatal doses that our entire team took out of the circulation and off the streets. Additionally, they seized 138.7 pounds of marijuana and nearly 159 grams of cocaine. These are real seizures of hard drugs, and those do make a significant difference in our city to get them off the streets. These successes, along with the increased security during the pandemic along our southern border, resulted in the street price of methamphetamine nearly doubling on the streets of Sioux Falls last year. I don't know if there's any greater impact metric than that. So where does that leave us? Well, our property and violent crime rates per 1,000 population at 37.15 and 6.55 respectively did tick up a bit last year. We also realized, if you recall, a population increase of an estimated 5,100 people in our city. As you can see on the chart there, our rate of growth in the city still exceeds our crime rates. The chart also shows that over time that the rates do go up and down, but frankly, they're remarkably steady in our city as we approach 200,000 in population. But while we talk about some of the challenges we faced in 2020 in keeping our city safe, I also want to point out a distinct point of pride in how we serve, and that is our case clearance rates. On the chart before you, you can see that for years our rates have been well above the national averages, and 2020 was no exception. Many areas are double the national average. This speaks to the dedication and skill and training level of our officers and detectives as they work to solve crimes. Our city is well served by their efforts, and I'm very proud of them and their success. So in 2021, what you should expect from the police department is continued focus on the work of community policing, on building relationships in our schools and our neighborhoods with people from all backgrounds and walks of life. You will, of course, see continued emphasis on drug enforcement, on traffic enforcement, and on investments in training, such as the training center, so we can continue to serve every resident of and visitor to our city with a high level of professionalism and customer service. For notwithstanding the challenges we have, Sioux Falls continues to be a very safe city, one with a high degree of optimism and promise that frankly is the envy of many. Our job, of course, is to ensure that it stays that way. For we know that having a safe community with that is attractive for families, professionals, and businesses does not happen by accident. It is the product of our elected leadership, making it a priority and providing the resources to our teams in public safety to keep making it a reality. We appreciate not only each of your support verbally, but your intentional and consistent efforts at supporting public safety across our city. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Chief Burns. Questions? Counselor Erickson.
Thank you. I have, 3, maybe 4 questions. One of the things that I thought was interesting on the chart with all of the crime statistics, that consistently for the last 3 years, we have seen a decrease in DUI arrests, which I think is something truly to be celebrated, especially when alcohol sales the last year were probably the highest they've been due to restaurants being closed, people being quarantined at home, etc. That was certainly an industry that has seen a high increase in sales, but yet people are either staying home or they're using things such as ride shares because there's a way to get home that's so easy at the tip of your fingertips right now. So truly seeing that decrease 3 years is something to celebrate, I feel, as a community, making sure people know if you are going to drink, make sure you take the appropriate steps in calling a cab or having a friend or whatever it may be to not drink and drive. So that's certainly great. 2 of the questions that I have, talk to me a little bit about Marcy's Law and how that still continues to impact us, or if it doesn't impact law enforcement. I know it's presented some challenges over the years once that did pass, or are we kind of through those stumbling times and we're now to a point where it's a good place to be?
No, I think that we've made our way well through the Marcy's Law thing. At the beginning, we had to work out that there were some expectations on the part of the media, and we worked through that and explained to them in very real terms what frankly the restrictions were in the law, and explaining that this is now a constitutional matter. So this is something that we all want to be very, very careful with. The last thing we want to do is make a mistake, however well-intended, and be up against a constitutional question. Frankly, I think that it does what it intended to. It does protect victims. There are some that say it's overly broad and that it's misapplied, but those are on the fringe. You don't hear that a lot. For our purposes, I think that it is doing what it's intended to do and what we all want it to do, and that is to help protect victims.
Perfect, thank you. And then my other question, the pot. We know it's coming, it's passed. We know there's groups frivolously working to see how this will, the policy changes and the laws and all of that. Is there a vibe, a feeling, a nervousness or anything, not nervousness, but a really, is there, how is your department handling that and or preparing for really big changes?
Sure. The reality is, for the past several years, when you took someone in to jail to get them a court date for a misdemeanor pot possession, it's been a PR bond. So there wasn't they just got out on a promise of appearance. So oftentimes, in those situations, the persons were getting out of jail before our paperwork was done. But we have a long history of enforcing the law, right? Enforcing the laws on the books. It's been illegal and is currently both at the state and federal level. And we will continue to do that until such time that the law changes. And we will, again, enforce that dutifully. It will be mentally a big change because we've seen over years, the effects that can have on people. And there have been people that have lost their lives because of the illicit marijuana trade. So it is a change in philosophy, a change of mindset. But if there's one thing I know that my team is good at, and that is pivoting to the next challenge. And so we will take our instruction, we will take that law, we will read it, we'll understand it, and we will apply it appropriately. So it's just the next thing for us.
Right. I appreciate that. Well, thank you for presenting. For me, I know truly, and I don't want to speak for the council as a whole, but I'm confident in saying that the city council has been very supportive of our law enforcement team and efforts, making sure that we are protecting them so they can protect us as a community and doing the right thing. When I pick up the phone and need to call 911, whether it's a car accident or anything, they're there, they're quick, they're respectful, and I'm just really thankful for the law enforcement team that we have here in Sioux Falls and what they're able to do. It's not like that everywhere that we've seen, and I'm just grateful that we value our law enforcement here in Sioux Falls. Thank you.
Counselor Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief Burns, I was looking at the stolen vehicles increase. Last year, 759, 2020, 1,121. What would be the reason for such a jump in stolen vehicles? And is there anything that we can do to, try and help in that regard?
We have seen that number, as you noted, go up and up and up, and that's been another part that's involved in a lot of other crimes too. It seems like it is in vogue now for certain segments of the criminal segment of our community that's just part of what they do in the course of their crime. We also see a lot of juveniles that are involved in stealing cars, okay? But it's not just Sioux Falls. I hear that the stolen vehicle numbers are up all across in law enforcement jurisdictions. I hear that from our peers. I think part of the issue is, like last year, part of that number, why it went up so much, I have to believe that, school wasn't in session for a time, so there was more persons out and about looking for and that were bored, things to do. I hope to make a serious impact on that number this next year, but if you recall, council, we have been tireless in our messaging for folks to lock and secure their vehicles. I stand here and tell you that almost 9 out of every 10 vehicles that we report we take that is stolen was unlocked and the keys were either in the ignition or somewhere that were obvious. To this day, despite our continued messaging, almost breathlessly so, Sam Clemens is, he's got that on a loop now. But we still have work to do in our messaging. So I just implore the citizens who are watching this or hear it later, please help us help you and secure your vehicles, lock them and take your valuables out because the pattern continues.
Mr. Chair, just a follow-up question. So you're telling me 9 out of 10 cars that are stolen have their keys in them and they're unlocked?
Yes.
That is a story in itself.
It certainly doesn't excuse the person that is stealing the car. They shouldn't be doing that. It's been against the law since there were cars on the road, but why make it easier for someone?
And one final question, Mr. Chair. What resources can we help provide for you right now? I'd challenge you to think big, and I know you are, but any resources that we can help provide to keep this community safe, I lift that up to you and bring it up, bring it to us. We know what we know, and you know what you know, so use us as a as a partner.
Thank you very much, Counselor.
Counselor Selberg?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Guilty as charged. I'm one of those kind of crazy people who leaves their key in the car and runs in it from time to time. I'm just waiting to be punished for that one of these, but it's great advice. I tell my girls the same, so do as I say, not as I do. Whoops. That was one of my questions, was the stolen vehicle part, because it almost went, what did it, almost double, so that surprised me a little bit, but you answered that one. Aggravated assault, I don't want to say this is a good number by any means, it's not, but I would actually have thought that might have even gone up a little bit more, domestic type things too, with people being more isolated in that too, but
Yeah. It was really the domestic aggravated and the simple that really jumped out at us.
yeah.
We don't expect, when a growing population, for the individual crime categories to necessarily go down year over year. When you grow by 5,100 people, you just naturally are going to have some creep in those numbers. It's counterintuitive to suggest otherwise. But some of the rates of increase, you know, that's why I say the context of these numbers is the pandemic of 2020. Forever, the year 2020 will have large asterisks after it for many reasons. The crime numbers and the crime dynamic of cities all over the country is certainly one of them.
Yeah, I think my point is, I mean, it's not good, but I actually thought it could have been worse, but. Can you tell me again, violent crimes, what all fits in that category? Is it everything that I'm pretty much thinking as you go down here? Obviously murder, rape, aggravated assault, are we pretty much everything in the top category? I mean, I don't think forgery and fraud necessarily is, but.
Yeah, fraud's not, but the big ones, the murder, rape, aggravated assault, and robbery are your Part 1 violent crimes, according to the FBI.
Okay, that's what I was curious.
So the number you see on the next slide, if I may, the 6.55, that is the rate per 1,000 population is calculated based upon those categories.
Okay, thank you. Well, again, we certainly do, as Councilor Erickson said, and I think Jensen, I think we all would reiterate we value now you and your team now more than ever. I think in the past, we've always tried to think of ways to go and be above and beyond and thank you with certain things or do certain things for your team, and that's tough to do, I know, but I don't know. Again, Councilor Jensen said it. I don't know what we can do to thank you, but I know that as far as watching national news and what's going on in this country, and just know that you're very much appreciated by the leadership of this city and what you do here, so thank you very much. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Counselor.
Any other questions? Counselor Brecky?
You noted that the overdose deaths were down, and then, I saw the seizures. Do you think it was seizure related? Or I've also been told that, that the police department's been working with the medical industry and that they're not prescribing opiates the way they used to prescribe them. Do you think that has had an impact on the overdoses as well? Or what is your best guess as to why the overdoses are down, which is great? But
Yes, it is great, and I will, again, I point that out as a bright light, and candidly, Counselor, I don't know for sure why, because it is, that bucked the trend nationally. Nationally, overdose deaths were up. So our drug task force team has been very diligent about getting, we're seeing an increase in the synthetic pills, right? They look like OxyContin pills, they're designed to look, but they are fentanyl laced. We have had a great deal of success getting a lot of those off the streets. You see a lot of those used in some of these overdose cases. We had a case last year where 3 persons were crushing those and snorting them. 2 out of the 3 went down and died right there at the scene. So those pills are a scourge, but we have had remarkable success getting those off the streets. It's not so much the prescription ones, it's the illicit ones is where we're seeing the real deaths come in. And some of that is not only the pills, but certainly the heroin, because heroin oftentimes can be cut with things that the user has no idea about. It's not like it's made in an FDA lab. It is made illicitly, and it's cut with items, and if that's too much fentanyl, and the user is used to taking a certain dose, and it's cut with fentanyl at a higher rate, that is just extremely dangerous. So I wish I had a better answer for you. We're still trying to kind of put our finger on why that went down and repeat that pattern if we can. We just don't have a good grasp on it yet.
And I guess just to give you an opportunity, that there has been so much discussion, in national news about police department policies, and, for me, the one thing I don't want to do is overreact. If we have good policies in place, and generally police department policies really parallel Supreme Court's cases, because the Supreme Court ultimately decides on a case-by-case basis as things go up, what's going to be acceptable for police officers to do in speed chases, high-speed chases, use of force, you know, those kinds of things. And so are you reviewing your policies? Have you reviewed them? Do you feel like they're still sound? Just anything that you want to say, I guess, in response to that, just give you that platform. Because I think, yeah, we're all happy that we're not dealing with it here, but I think it probably, you know, is something that everybody's, you know, thinking about. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to just kind of address that issue.
Well, I thank you for that. In fact, I was just talking to Tom Hansen from the media the other night, and we've just come off another fresh policy review with a company we contracted with called the LLRMI, which is the Legal and Liability Risk Management Institute. And so many of our top policies, which cover the high liability items like use of force, like pursuits, and things like that, we have gone a robust review of those. In fact, a part of that was we recently came out and strictly prohibited the use of chokeholds. We've done some other things inside of policies. So as you look across the nation and some of those, the main things that law enforcement agencies are doing that's saying this is no longer acceptable. Many of these things we're not trained, we're not part of our culture, we're not accepted, but we've taken the extra step of actually codifying that and putting that in policy. So I'm very comfortable with the level that our policies are at right now, but we will continue to review those along with the national expectations, but also those key Supreme Court rulings. Our police legal advisor, Keith Allenstein, is very good at doing that and helping us keep those policies accountable.
All righty, thank you.
You bet.
Counselor Erickson?
One other quick question. Sorry. One other quick question I had. A couple years ago, we did Pretrial Task Force, which was a joint collaboration between the Sheriff's Office, the Police Department, and then the judges with the county, where those criminals that you all arrest, we're really good job, you know, we do a really good job here if arresting folks if you're doing the crime. But the mentality changed a little bit of saying, hey, we want to label a number on someone to see if you're a flight risk, because we want to put the scary ones in jail, and the ones we're mad at, you know, come back and hopefully we'll get you the help that you need versus just throwing you in the jail and ruining the chance of you ever being really a person able to be out and about in society. Has that really moved the needle, or is it just a good tool that we're not seeing the influx in our jail as our population grows? Has it made a difference, or is it just another good tool that we have?
So are you specifically referencing the MacArthur grant?
Not the triage one, but where, we called it the pretrial task force,
Oh, sure.
where we work through that.
Yeah, I sit on a number of those committees, and what we've seen internally is there's many things that the judiciary has done inside their workflows to make, I guess, gain efficiencies. So they're trying to get some of their cases through faster, and when you do that, that reduces the daily population, and I think that's certainly one of the goals of the MacArthur Task Force, but also the pretrial justice, is just maintaining those efficiencies. For our part, myself and certainly the sheriff are keeping a close eye on that to make sure that doesn't have some sort of unintended effect on public safety. We have not seen any effects that are concerning to us. Even last year, when we took a very close look at the bond schedule with the circuit court and Judge Howman, you know, we were a little bit concerned about that. It was kind of uncharted territory, but frankly, many of those adjustments and changes we made haven't had any impact negatively on public safety. So frankly, I can see us keeping many of those changes permanently, just because they've increased efficiencies inside the system. So I think it's been a good look. Sometimes you get forced into doing something because of something like a pandemic, but actually you discover that there's some real positives that you can gain out of it.
Thank you.
Chief, I'd like to have one thing you address. So these are statistics looking in the rearview mirror. Why don't you look forward and give us a couple of minutes about what you see coming forward and where you're going to spend your time and your energy and your focus?
Well, I think that we're all aware there's some significant development coming to our community. It's already here. You look at the Amazon, you look at the C.J. Schwann's, and that's just the beginning with the completion of Highway 100 and all the development that we're going to see, not only in the southeast quadrant of the city, but continued every quadrant of the city. I think keeping up with just the calls for service, expectations for service, not only at the police department, But in Public Works and the Parks Department is going to be one of our biggest challenges. It's just matching that scale with the growth that we know, not only to catch up, but maybe sometimes even get a little bit ahead of it. We're looking at that very closely. That kind of growth and looking forward, it was projected in our asking for your approval, and thank you for giving it for the Southwest Station, for putting the Southeast Station, as far as the police department goes, on the capital plan a few years out, and planning there in the footprint with Station 12 at 41st and Faith. And frankly, we're looking northwest already for areas where might be the best spot for a northwest station. So when it comes to future growth and planning, that's what we're doing. As we've said, you know, we're finite in our space at the Law Enforcement Center campus. So we have to be looking at those remote locations to expand our force, because we know it's going to continue to grow along with the population. Where are they going to go? Well, we're going to have the remote model is the future of policing in our city. So that's the path that we've taken.
Okay. One last question, Councilor Jensen.
Thanks. Say the Southeast station, how much would that cost?
The Southeast Station, I think, is currently in the capital plan. Forgive me, I don't have it at top of mind. About like 1.5 million for construction. But what the advantages are, we already own the land. It's already on the footprint of Station 12, so all the city infrastructure would already be there. Just design and then build.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chief Burns. As always, very informative.
Thank you.
Moving on to public comment. If there's anybody here, you have up to 5 minutes to speak on this subject. Seeing none, we'll move to adjournment. Thank you very much.